Now, the Agile governance buffer zone is not enough. We've got to add a few more things into that organizational concept to bring this model to life. So we need a new artifact. That new artifact is called the governance backlog. We introduced the idea of a governance backlog as an analogous concept to a product backlog. The governance backlog actually follows the same Agile ceremony schedule or Agile process as the product backlog. The governance backlog, very simply, is a prioritized list of governance requirements that are identified during product planning, release planning, backlog grooming, and sprint planning. And as those governance priorities bubble up to the top of the governance backlog, they are triggered into the appropriate governance process mechanisms for resolution such that a decision can be made before a sprint team needs a decision made. So that's essentially what we're doing with the governance backlog, is identifying governance requirements before they have the chance to slow down Agile delivery, and therefore we're working to use the governance backlog grooming process to trigger action on governance ahead of specific sprints needing those governance decisions to be made. That's the concept. So this rhythm of governance will work in cadence with Agile delivery without slowing it down. Now, this fits into the picture I'm showing, which is an Agile governance lifecycle model that we've created to introduce this concept. On the left, outlined with the pink background, is that governance backlog, which again is created during product planning initially. So you do the normal product planning to create the product backlog. You also create the governance backlog, which again helps you prioritize governance requirements as they fall out of product planning. Again, you're anticipating potential governance gotchas that you may have to address during the Agile delivery process. And then during product planning, and based on the governance backlog priorities, you trigger a governance action request, which is essentially just an event that triggers the enterprise IT governance processes to take a look at a particular governance issue. This can happen months to weeks ahead of, again, a specific sprint meeting that decision made, but that gives the enterprise time to consider and get a resolution for a governance requirement during the product planning cycle, which again is something that happens 2 to 4 times perhaps a year, obviously with continuous updates. So that's how the Agile governance lifecycle starts, is creating the governance backlog during product planning. Now let's follow it through. I just described the product planning cycle and what happens there. You create the backlog, you prioritize it, you trigger governance action requests from the enterprise. You also would trigger governance action requests that'll be addressed by the community governance team. So you're essentially feeding forward potential governance issues for advanced resolution by the enterprise and by the community governance team, hopefully before the sprints need that. So you're feeding forward a governance requirement and hopefully pre-governing, if you will. Now during release planning, similar process. We're doing release planning. We update the product backlog. We update the governance backlog. We identify any governance requirements that bubble to the top. For high priority governance needs, we trigger a governance action request. That governance action request gets fed into the community governance team, gets fed up to the enterprise as needed. What we also do during release planning, though, is we give the sprint teams a heads up that there may be a governance impact that's being addressed already, but they need to just be aware that there may be a governance impact. So everyone's watching out for the governance implications of the work that they're doing. And also during release planning, of course, we're doing some ongoing monitoring of these governance events and triggers during backlog grooming, so we can just keep a constant vigilant visibility of any governance issues that may arise. So release planning, of course, happens, again, more frequently than product planning, less frequently than sprint planning, but it still is a mechanism that would identify and reprioritize governance needs and then feed those into the model. Now, during sprint planning, there's 2 things that happen in that process. Actually, between release planning and sprint planning, you're doing backlog grooming on a continual basis. So backlog grooming will also trigger both the product backlog grooming process and the governance backlog grooming process. Same things happen. You trigger a governance action request based on governance priorities or things that need to be addressed. Those get fed into the model for governance support. And then in sprint planning, as the sprint teams are doing their sprint planning work, ideally, there won't be any governance issues that come up because they've already been captured in prior planning ceremonies. But if a governance requirement does come up during sprint planning, and I'm showing this on the next picture, we have the opportunity to trigger a governance spike out of that sprint team that will address potential governance issues that emerged during the sprint planning. And then what we would do with those is put those on a fast track for an escalation and a resolution quickly by either the Agile community team or by the enterprise. So what we're trying to do is show how you can address governance ahead of time, and then for any emergent governance requirements that come out of a sprint planning session, you can either spike it and address it that way, or you can escalate it and get resolution that will fit within the 2 to 4 week sprint execution cycle that we're normally used to. So very complicated, very fast kind of coverage of the idea there, but the main thing that we're trying to solve with this is to get governance decisions made faster, earlier, and then only emergent things coming out of the sprint planning cycle, those get treated as a real-time request and they get escalated all the way to the top for very rapid escalation and resolution. And that will allow sprint teams to do work at their tempo, but still for the few things that make it through to sprint planning, the few open governance issues that might surface, those can get addressed quickly. Now, we need another thing to introduce here. We need a new role. We've created the idea of an Agile governance owner. So an Agile governance owner is responsible for managing that governance backlog artifact. They're also a person whose sole purpose is to facilitate these governance process flows by coordinating governance action triggers and events, going to the enterprise, to the community team, and to the at the self-governing level, at the sprint team level. So they own the product, the governance backlog. They facilitate governance decisions being made. They keep track of things so they don't fall through the cracks. And they make sure that there's no delayed or blocked governance or governance decisions so that, again, we can sustain the tempo of Agile delivery and scaled Agile delivery without slowing it down. So they have a kind of an important role. It's graphically illustrated here. So there's our Agile governance over and the nice pretty green bubble on the left with a whistle. And the red arrows show that the Agile governance owner runs across all the Agile teams, facilitating their efforts, plays a strong role in the community governance model and making sure they're functioning well, but also is an active participant in the enterprise governance process to make sure that things are being coordinated and driven there. Again, sole purpose of that Agile governance owner is to facilitate governance, own the governance backlog, and make sure there's not a delay in any particular governance decision because of a lack of accountability or lack of definition of a particular governance domain's policies, processes, enforcement mechanisms, or oversight boards. So they've got a challenging role. It's important that this Agile governance owner, that it be clear, they are not assigned to a sprint team. They're not assigned to any project. Their job is to facilitate the overall execution of Agile governance processes the way we've defined them. Now that brings us to one of the most key aspects of this model, and that's the idea of this Agile Pre Governance approach. The whole idea of Agile Pre Governance is this advanced notice and identification of governance requirements and concerns early and before a sprint team needs them to be made. So governance issues are identified before releases, before sprints are identified, and before those releases and sprints actually know or are aware that they need a particular governance requirement to be addressed. So I'll go back to the graphic here. The whole idea is that, again, in product planning, We identify potential governance issues. We feed them forward into the enterprise. We feed them into the community governance team. The decisions can get made before a sprint team is actually assigned to a particular sprint in the sprint planning process. The very same idea for release planning. We identify potential governance issues out of that governance backlog during release planning. We get them pre-governed before the sprint teams need them. So hopefully by the time, again, sprint planning takes place and the sprint teams actually have to start doing their work, they have their governance decision made for them. The Agile Pre Governance process also gets leveraged during backlog grooming, which of course is an ongoing process in the Agile ceremony process. Backlog grooming on the product backlog will result in backlog grooming of the governance backlog. Any other priority governance requirements will get surfaced, fed into the governance model, and addressed. Again, by the time the sprint planning process takes place and the Agile team is doing its tasks, the only governance issues they may have to address are very emergent tactical ones, which, again, we'll deal with in a near real-time basis, either with a spike or by escalating them up the governance model into the enterprise or as far as it needs to go to get a resolution within a 2 to 4 week sprint cycle. So Agile Pre-Governance is all about addressing governance needs before they need to be addressed and before the demand for that resolution occurs at the sprint team level. The governance backlog items are prioritized. This idea of governance action requests are actually the triggers for getting oversight for particular governance requirements. Again, either by the Agile team, by the community team, or by the enterprise. And if we have to feed that governance requirement into a specific domain governance team, let's say there's a data governance issue that's been identified, we can get data governance issues deconflicted by the appropriate data governance people. If that's a SOA governance, reuse governance kind of a requirement, we can feed that governance requirement into that particular domain team, if you will. If it's something to do with mobile or cloud or security, we can get the governance decision routed to the appropriate people, again, well in advance of the sprint team needing it. So I hope I'm explaining this in a clear way. Graphically, this Agile Pre-Governance process flow is what I'm illustrating here. So, product planning on the left, I'm showing green arrows feeding governance action requests into the enterprise and into the community governance team. That's where they'll get addressed primarily. Again, think about this happening months, weeks ahead of the need for these governance issues by a sprint team. In release planning, the same process is followed. Governance action requests are triggered to the community team and to the enterprise. Again, in weeks, not months, hopefully, again, being addressed and resolved before sprint teams need them. Backlog grooming happening, which also surfaces governance action requests. They need to be addressed a little quicker, but again, we're talking weeks outside of the 2 to 4 week sprint cycle. And then, of course, at the sprint level, with self-governance being in place, now I'm showing these as red arrows because we understand that when the sprint identifies an emergent governance requirement that hasn't already been pre-governed in this flow, it's dealt with those red arrows, which basically means it's a near real-time response. It gets escalated anywhere in the organization it needs to be escalated to get a decision made. That's, again, what the Agile governance owner has to do, is to get that resolution addressed in time so that the sprint team can still meet its delivery schedule. So this is, again, a graphical illustration of the idea of Agile Pre-Governance. Again, it maps to product planning, release planning, backlog grooming, and sprint planning and execution. So when you put this whole idea into action, it's going to take some work. It's going to take commitments by the enterprise to support the implementation of this enterprise Agile delivery methodology. So again, I've emphasized that you do need to probably go pull the Lean Governance Manifesto and understand these principles of event-driven governance. But then what we've offered is this specific scaled Agile version of the event-driven governance idea in support of a scaled Agile governance framework. So you got to commit to Agile. You got to commit to this style of governing. There's going to be some process design and organizational design and some re-engineering or reintegration of some of the upstream IT governance processes that are going to be involved, even if you're doing Agile. Now, this reminds me of a point that we hear all the time when we're talking Agile, and I hope I don't get into trouble from people, but there's a lot of pure Agile ideas that believe that architecture emerges from the sprint. And so, the idea that in Agile, architecture emerges from the sprint is not going to always play well in an organization that has a fairly strong or mature enterprise architecture discipline, in which EA defines application architecture and other standards, and then makes those governance decisions accessible to the projects, and the projects have to align to them. So, some of the ideas around the pure Agile model, where, for example, architecture emerges from the sprint, that's not as necessarily as scalable of a mechanism for doing enterprise architecture governance. So we think that some of these scaled Agile governance ideas will support doing some top-down enterprise architecture work, but will also enable some bottom-up solution architecture kinds of things happening within the sprint, such that you can mediate the differences, get alignment to an enterprise architecture set of requirements, again, in a way that will not slow things down. The third statement on this slide, commitment to Agile governance using this whole event-driven governance concept is important. So, and again, what we've talked about is, implementing the Agile buffer zone alone is going to take some work. And I'm going to go back up to that graphic just to reinforce this point. The Agile governance buffer zone really is a virtual layer that's 3 tiers of governing, with self-governance, community governance, and then the traditional top-down prescriptive enterprise IT governance framework. So implementing self-governance, trust but verify models are really interesting and compelling, and it can be done as long as the organization will allow trust and empowerment to be pushed deeper into the organization. It also means that as you lay out the various types of governance requirements in your organization, it means that you're going to trust these self-governing Agile teams to make the governance decisions around certain things. It's not to say you won't look in and audit or verify later, but you're going to empower and trust them to make the right decisions. Self-governance, trust but verify, almost always means that you've got enough governance maturity where you've documented the policies, the governance processes, and the requirements and standards, and those are somewhere in a repository of some kind where they're accessible by those governance teams and clear, and they know what their parameters are for making their self-governing decisions at that level. So, that's a set of ideas around just that self-governance model. In the community governance, same sort of ideas apply, except that in this case, the community governance model spans all these Agile teams. You can, in fact, put a community governance construct over all your different projects and programs and all the Agile teams. And that community model would, again, be a more informal yet empowered governance structure that will be able to make fast decisions based on their experience, their knowledge, their seniority within the organization. But again, they can make those decisions much faster than if they have to go all the way up to the enterprise processes. Clearly, this community governance idea, this team, means that they are senior, respected, trusted agents of the enterprise. And similarly, They know what their boundaries and parameters are for making decisions in a trust but verify approach. But as they make decisions, they will communicate their decisions up for concurrence to the enterprise. So if I were to RACI chart this out, they would be making governance decisions. The enterprise would have visibility to those decisions. It would be opportunity to concur on those or throw a red flag down if for some reason they're not in agreement. So just the Agile governance buffer zone is going to take some commitment and work organizationally to get these kinds of governance concepts in place. And then you can get to the ability to implement these other processes that we've just described, the governance backlog artifact, and introducing the governance backlog grooming process along with the product backlog grooming process. Introducing that governance backlog during product planning, release planning, backlog grooming, and sprint planning. So, that's a commitment to this kind of a governance design. Implementing the governance, the Agile governance owner, the facilitator, is another concept that you've got to get some support for. The idea of Agile Pre Governance, as I've described it here in this webinar, I don't think that's going to cause pain for people. Again, it should be a refreshing breath of fresh air for getting governance decisions made early. But again, we still need a commitment to implement the process concept of this idea. So putting it into action is going to take those kinds of things. But what I'm convinced of is that as you take the ideas of event-driven governance and apply them to your organization, as you apply event-driven governance to scaled Agile or enterprise Agile in your organization, what's going to happen is you're going to turn those iron triangles of IT governance into two connected gears of governance that turn together. Still security is another cog that maybe connects them together. But my premise is that if you implement these concepts in your organization, you'll establish the transformation of those iron triangles that are rigid and strong and friction-laden. They'll turn into gears that turn together in harmony, and they will enable those Agile teams that try to interact with them to perform at a much faster rate. So the governance triangles become gears, in my view, once you take event-driven governance ideas and implement them at the enterprise level, as well as implement the scaled Agile governance model, which again is a subset or specific instance of using event-driven governance principles. Now, I think the bigger thing that is potentially out there is this whole idea that I'm showing in this illustration of the integrated Agile enterprise. And when I use that term, I don't mean scaled Agile in this case. I'm talking about the scenarios where the business is using Agile delivery for building out business capabilities or new products and new services on the business side, and then they work with IT doing Agile at the IT level here. So it's a fully integrated Agile enterprise where business and IT are following basically the same Agile processes, following the same Agile governance ideas, and that has loads of potential to drive enterprise performance, both business and IT, to levels of efficiency and effectiveness that we have not yet seen in these days. I think that's what the potential is for this kind of an idea. Now, I'll further suggest that if you get this scaled Agile governance right and are successful getting scaled Agile or the integrated Agile enterprise in your organization, what you have the opportunity to implement is what I'm illustrating here. You can get to a 3-speed IT delivery model. Now, that's a phrase that I'm using. Boston Consulting Group uses the term 2-speed IT. In their view, there's two speeds. One speed is the Agile speed, which is being applied to all the new technology development in a given organization. And then there's waterfall for things like infrastructure and other more conservative delivery requirements that don't have to go as fast as Agile. So they use two-speed. I turn this into three-speed IT, and three-speed IT refers to the combination of enterprise Agile, DevOps, and cloud computing as the technology enabling this kind of a model. And if you put those three IT delivery speeds together with a common governance framework for them all, what you'll end up with is faster. You'll end up with one speed called faster. So it's a little bit of a provocative thought to consider, but again, from a business, integrated Agile enterprise perspective that we showed in the slide before, and I've got up there now, to get to this picture in today's environment, to me, almost explicitly says that you've got to implement cloud computing capabilities to get the infrastructure and other service provisioning processes ironed out. You need a DevOps model to take application delivery and quickly get things provisioned into production. That's all about what DevOps is, with some of the continuous integration and other automation kinds of tools that are out there. But then you put scaled Agile on top of it, you've got a three-scoop ice cream cone of goodness here that can result in nothing but faster delivery of business capabilities. I hope that metaphor worked. So this three-speed IT opportunity really means one thing. It's the one speed that the business always wants, and that's called faster. And faster meets the requirements of today's business climate.